Welcome to the DreamlandXR speaker series on sports tech. We're going to be talking today about XR, VR and AR and its applications across sports and esports. Say thanks first to Greg and Chris and the team at DreamlandXR for having us. I'm not in Vegas this year, sadly. We're on Zoom, but it is what it is. We've got a great panel here today. So I think we go around and let you all introduce yourselves would be great. So in no particular order, I'm going to work my way around my Zoom screen here. So Stephen, if you want to kick us off and say hi.
Hey there. I work over at Twitch, head of esports and content production. So I oversee two of our big properties, Twitch Rivals and Twitch Gaming, and also responsible for executive producing our special events, StreamAid and GlitchCon most recently in November.
Great, thank you. Swan?
Hi, so I'm SwanVR. I basically worked for Live, created the OG Beat Saber video with Escape that got over 100 million views. And then I ended up working more in terms of the conscious like tech space with Andromeda Entertainment, doing game publishing of meditation VR, dance VR, and now kind of doing my own kind of creative ventures in Bali.
Amazing, and we're not all jealous that you're in Bali today, but let's just move on from that. James, if you could introduce yourself, that would be great.
Yeah, I'm James Jensen, and I'm the CEO and founder of Jump, which is a new hyper-reality location-based entertainment company, and we specialize wingsuit and base jumping.
Amazing, Michele.
Hey guys, I'm Michele Attisani. I'm the Chief Business Officer of FACEIT. FACEIT is the leading esports platform. We have over 20 million users, and we have a media division that produces over 1,000 hours of live content, premium content a year. We just built recently a 24,000 square feet facility in Los Angeles for high quality content production with investment close to $5 million. We run and operate a studio in London as well. And yeah, this year we've been really involved in a lot of technology innovation around broadcasting.
Great. Cliff, over to you.
Sure. Cliff Shoemaker, a senior manager of digital programming and acquisitions at ESPN. Been with the company for a little over 15 years, and day to day I negotiate and acquire audience expansion programming for our company, which includes gaming, esports, ESPN, the Ocho properties, if you've seen some of that. So just kind of get to work on a whole bunch of audience expansion programming and then program schedule that on ESPN digital platforms, ESPN app, ESPN Plus, our new direct-to-consumer.
Thanks, Cliff. Joe, over to you.
Yeah, I'm Joe Robbins. I am the founder and executive producer at XRJoe. I was previously at Red Bull for about 5 years, where I led the production and development of all things immersive media out of North America, and that included our biggest achievement, which was securing a sports Emmy last year for our efforts at Red Bull Rampage.
Congratulations on that as well. Okay, so I'm going to be your moderator today. My name's Jason Wiltshire from Advncr, production company and creative agency. We produce big game moments like EA Play, big esports events, all the way down to smaller streams, video work, but everything we do, community channels, everything we do is based around video games. So I think that's all of us. So let's kick things off. So I think the first thing I wanted to hit was, what does new tech like XR, AR and VR offer sports and esports, in your opinion? Who wants to kick us off with that one?
I can start.
Go on, brilliant, thank you.
Yeah, well, VR is allowing a lot of people to go virtual with gyms in a way. So the people that's quarantining at home, they're playing Beat Saber, like Pistol Whip, Supernatural, Audio Trip, all these games to kind of get in shape. And now there's like calorie counters such as like YUR and Oculus Moves. And it goes even further than that because there's now an esports school that basically is trying to buy a bunch of these VR headsets to basically have these at-home gyms for the students.
So when you're talking about the tech can offer sports at almost at the entry level, right? When you're going.
It's more engagement and the fact that this might be the future gyms. If all the students are in Zoom, like what's the extracurricular activities? There's this one that's teaming up with a lot of universities and colleges and high schools and offering VR headsets for the students at home. This is like definitely more of the higher end schools to actually basically get their exercise in, to basically have esports through VR.
That's super interesting because when you talk about, and please, I'm going to stop talking in a minute. You guys all jump in because that's the whole point of this. But I think what you've just raised there is really interesting because for me, that's talking about sports at almost at the sort of the entry level, you know, the grassroots level of sports and esports. And I think the thing you mentioned engagement there, and the question I've always got around XR, AR, and VR is when I think about sports. And naturally, because of the area I work in, I always tend to think about the end product, like the broadcast end, how people engage, maybe not so much physically with sports, but how they watch it and how they consume it. And I sort of, one of the questions I have is when we start looking at all these new techs, is how do they enhance engagement in that way? How do they enhance the experience? You know, when it comes to VR, we're all completely closed in on our headset. You know, obviously. There's other tech there as well. So I'd like to open it up and sort of ask, you know, how do you see it in relation to engagement and people experiencing sports as well as participating in them?
I think I can jump in. I think at ESPN, you know, our goal here is to bring people closest, you know, as close as possible to that on-field presentation, right? Whether that's through traditional broadcast. I think no better use case was like last night's megacast offering of the college football playoff, right, of championship. We have 14 unique feeds, like serving every type of audience through data center and film room and coaches room and radios and homes and work. And VR AR just fits right in that kind of wheelhouse of, hey, here's another way to experience this game, to get as close as possible to, you know, on-field, you know, experience, right? Fans aren't allowed on field. Fans can't get as close as they're allowed as security would let them, but AR, VR probably breaks down a lot of that barrier. And I think there's an onus on us as a broadcaster of sports to open those gates, get people that access they deserve and want.
I agree with that, especially with esports. Like you can get one-to-one time with your like streams. Like basically if there's someone that you really adore, like the VR of Ninja hasn't been there yet. So like once he or she comes into the spotlight, like you can actually have a one-to-one conversation with them on Twitch or Mixer. And that wasn't as accessible before. Like if you want to follow a sports star, you follow their Instagram, their Twitter, their like Facebook and trying to get to know them. But with Twitch, it removes that barrier where you can just kick it with them and it makes it more of an authentic relation.
Yeah, and Jason, I'll jump in from a Twitch perspective and some of the original content that we do. I think esports and video games as a whole, it's all about imagination and taking a leap into a fantasy world and something that's different. And I think what XR and some of the other components that brings to the table, it's a new kind of paintbrush. It's a new way for us to paint a backdrop and expand people's imaginations. We like to think that the cost is cheaper because we're doing it in an XR world, but it's not. But it is absolutely a new medium. And it's something that allows us to go beyond just building a stadium, an arena, or even a set, and create this, you know, environment that we can start to do things to not only visually, you know, dazzle all the viewers, but also to to change the focal point and to use some of these beyond physics opportunities to think about how to tell a story, how to pull in data. And as we continue to make strides in how we can pull in interactivity, especially on Twitch, from fan engagement, from chat dynamics, from cheering, all the next levels to tell the story with a whole new dimension compared to what we used to do in a studio.
Yeah,
I like that a lot, Steve. I mean, when I was at Red Bull, we really approached things in the sense like, how can we use technology to tell better stories? And with Rampage specifically, the hardest thing that we identified about that particular event was to convey how dangerous that sport actually is. I mean, you're going 40 miles an hour down a basically straight down, rock face. And that doesn't translate to traditional 2D camera very well. It looks very flat. So when we scanned that venue in 3D, it gave us the ability to do two things. Like, we delivered an AR experience into the Red Bull TV app that was in 3D, so you could really see for the first time how steep this terrain really is and how crazy these guys are for riding down it on a bicycle. And then the following year, we were able to take that information into the broadcast, where we knew we had the bigger audience compared to AR, and we were able to overlay, three-dimensional graphics in space and create previews of each rider's run that allowed us to use that tech to tell better stories, to convey that message to the audience in a way that without that scan, we would not have been able to do it.
Yeah, I love that idea, Joe and Steve, just like having a different perspective in esports. I mean, me and my kids, we play Dota 2 sometimes, and I can't imagine like being able to be inside the game and see a top-down view in 3-dimensional where you're actually seeing the characters move around. There's this really cool place that I went to called Sleep No More in New York, and everybody has on these face masks and they walk around, and there's a whole play that's happening, but everybody has a different vantage point, and you can kind of follow whatever character you want to. And so maybe taking that kind of approach and getting different perspectives inside of video games, where you're closer to the characters, you're closer to the people that are playing, and you're seeing from a different vantage point, would be really fun to do.
Yeah, I like to add from our perspective, we are a tech company at core, but ultimately with our media division, we're creating entertainment products. So for us, it's always been about trying to use technology to innovate. We had, internal development, engineering resources since the very beginning to utilize data to make the broadcast more compelling and interesting for the fans, but also to develop more interactive features where people are not just like passively consuming the content, but can actually really interact with the show and the content and the talent on air. And that ultimately, led us to adopting and really looking at all the newest technology. Again, going back to the entertainment point, adopting new things like virtual studios was a big part of the last year with COVID. Remote productions, augmented reality, and XR are just like phenomenal ways to take all that content and information and serve it to the fans and the viewers in a compelling fashion, rather than just having your traditional stat screen or your 2D, let's say, graphics on the broadcast. I think some of this technology gives us a real opportunity to engage the audience in a new dimension.
Yeah,
I think that's the really interesting thing, isn't it? Joe, if you look at Joe's case example, and you mentioned COVID, which will neatly segue onto the next thing I wanted to talk about. But so thanks for that. But it's the interesting thing, I think, with any of these new tech, when it's used as a gimmick or a gadget or for the sake of it, that's when it never lands. It's always when it's used for a reason. And to neatly move on to my the next thing I wanted to talk about was with necessity being the mother of invention, and things obviously with the pandemic going on, and it's making, certainly with esports and with regular sports, making entertainment very difficult. I'd like to talk about how those technologies have offered a way forward in this time. And certainly, full disclosure, our company Advncr just worked with Stephen's team over at Twitch on an XR execution of their Rivals program. I know from a regular sports point of view, you know, when COVID all kicked off, Cliff's team over at ESPN were running, you know, FIFA and esports when there's no soccer or no football to put on. So I think that'd be the next thing I'd sort of like to ask is sort of, you know, have these new technologies been the answer for esports in a COVID world?
I think, I mean, it's definitely new technology there, yes. But I think, you know, it's really been esports and gaming was what was alive still, right? And what withstood it, right? I mean, when everything shut down in person, you know, that March 12th was a very fateful day at ESPN where we got calls and just everything shut down. And now we had to, you know, we have 7 24-hour live, you know, programming networks that needed content that we're used to going forward with. And we had to really do some soul searching on what do we put on, what do we start programming and stuff. And, you know, super thankful for our partners, many on this call who've helped us in esports over the years that we could call on and just start creating content. And, you know, we've all been at esports events, we've all been at traditional sporting events and stuff. And, you know, it is extremely hard to replicate being with fans and being in person. And, you know, we weathered the storm, right? And we got through to where sports is back, but sports is back without fans. And that's still a very unique position for us to be in. And man, we really need to think very long and hard about VR, AR, XR, and opportunities like this to replicate putting fans back in that moment, putting fans next to each other, experiencing traditional and esports together, because, you know, it's why we went into the business we're in. We believe in it. We know it works extremely well. I want to get back to a future where we can experience it together. It sounds like VR is a good solution for that.
Yeah, and I'll jump in. As Twitch, we're a very streamer focused company. It's our lifeblood, and that's some of the most exciting stories are told from our streamer perspective. So we actually have built a model at Twitch Rivals where it thrives off of streamers being at home and in their bedrooms. So the break was when we would have a TwitchCon, or we would have something like our Streamer Bowl on site at the Super Bowl City, where we'd bring everyone together. So COVID for us was actually a little bit more of an accelerant for how do we do more of what we love to do without having to put in and be disruptive. So the challenge for us was a little bit different, where we said, well, we actually love our streamers being at home. It's their natural environment. We don't have to take them out of you know, that aquarium, right? But then the question is, when we do an event and we do something that's a little bit more premium or special, or maybe the prize pool is bigger, how do we make that known that it's not just a streamer, you know, waking up and going back on stream yet another day? How do we create an environment that feels special, that allows us to have what feels like a big, you know, arena environment and feels more grand, but also gives that streamer or that creator an amazing amount of content and a perspective and an experience that they can't have any other day at home? And really, actually, might be simpler than getting on a plane and flying across the country, or in some cases across the world. So for us, XR specifically, and a lot of the tools that we're going to continue to innovate with, allow us to actually do more of what we love and continue to stitch together the creators and build these new environments, but also do like what we did at GlitchCon, where we built a purple room, where we had an interview area, or move our casters really just with the swipe of a camera and something behind the scenes to an area where we could present something for sponsors or something different. So it's been an interesting accelerant for us. And I think COVID was just an excuse to move that timeline quicker, and something that we want to continue to build on in the future. Still with the hope that we'll have LAN events and we'll do in-person things, because there is nothing like that. But it's been an interesting growth area for us as well.
I think in that same line, I think one of the opportunities that COVID has kind of created is people that haven't even considered what virtual reality is, or this type of thing where we're talking in a virtual existence, right? That they were kind of forced to be a part of it and understand it and try to embrace the technology where that wasn't happening before. And I think there's a huge shift that way, and this environment has kind of changed that, which is an amazing opportunity for people that are creating virtual experiences. There's a bigger demographic of people that understand it, or that have been educated in what this is. Even if they've had the Zoom experience, at least they're starting to understand that, where they wouldn't even have done it in the past.
Completely agree with that.
I just want to add that like esports in terms of just multiplayer games, more people have been flocking to multiplayer for that connectivity as an outlet for connection is something that's super powerful in terms of like helping people feel like they're not alone, even though they're like in quarantine.
To extend on something James touched on, I mean, the power of virtual production and traditional broadcast right now, I don't think would have been realized without the pandemic that we're going through right now. The use of game engine and traditional broadcast has accelerated. Like, I don't think anybody could have predicted. I mean, it was about a year ago that we all got to see the VFX breakdowns from The Mandalorian with the use of LED stages. And, you know, I think this is still such a nascent space. And COVID has just like completely bolstered all of this innovation in the space of virtual production for broadcasters that never would have touched it to innovate. I mean, I remember watching America's Got Talent earlier this year with my parents during lockdown. And I was like, wow, they went above and beyond with technology to solve the problem of not having an audience, bringing it to the stage. Like the effects that they were able to achieve on stage, even for the artists, were just like out of this world when you compare it to, you know, prior broadcasts in previous years. I mean, there's been so much innovation this year. I wish it would have happened under different circumstances, but I'm happy that we're headed towards this this norm of virtual production in broadcast, because I think it's really cool.
I think you hit the nail on the head there, actually, with that, because that's one of the. I mean, we actually worked with the team who did the Katy Perry American Idol video. I think I wasted a good portion of our first call with them by saying, "So how did you do that bit? Oh yeah, and then how did you do that bit? And how did this bit work?" But then actually, when you actually get on set and see this tech, certainly with the XR stuff, it's crazy. So the camera dictates the picture rather than what's appearing in the background. I had that explained to me 4 or 5 times. Till you see it in person, it really doesn't do it justice. But there's a couple of interesting things popped up there, and what you're saying is I completely agree. I think it's the unfortunate circumstances have propelled all this tech. What's really great is that at the moment it's incredibly nascent, and to Stephen's point earlier, it's incredibly expensive. It's not a cheap thing to do. That's going to come down. I mean, I remember when, you know, not trying to show my age or anything, but I remember, you know, when a beta player, you know, for you know, running tape in a studio was like a 70 grand piece of equipment, and it can be done off a $500 laptop now. So like, you know, the cost will come down for sure. What I think is exciting about it is that we're using game engines, and certainly on the XR, and this will all, obviously all these techs sort of converge together. But what's great is that it lets you do things you just couldn't do on a normal stage, and certainly you couldn't do, you know, sometimes for financial reasons and sometimes for physical reasons. So, you know, the amount of LEDs in a scene that you know you can have in an XR environment when it's all built in a game engine is unlimited. Like, you know, there's no worry about budget because it's just signals going into the game engine. Whereas, you know, if you wanted to do that on a real stage for a real event, you'd be looking at spending an incredible amount of money. So I think, and then even further than that, the fact when, you know, it lets you defy physics. I mean, for Stephen's Twitch show, there was a giant jumbotron which flew through the air and rotated and went down, and, you know, if it tried to build it, would have probably killed several people during the process when you first tried to put it up there, because it literally defied physics. But so I think that's a really interesting side of it for sure. I still I guess to move on from that then slightly. So if we're saying that COVID's what's sort of facilitated all this, you know, what in a post-COVID world, how does VR and how does XR and AR integrate itself into sports and esports broadcasts and events and live events when there's people back in the room? You know, is that the end of XR, or is there a clever way of converging all these technologies?
I mean, I think it's just the beginning, really. Like with COVID, we had an opportunity of, you know, accelerating the adoption of these new technologies. We were, you know, we've been toying with the idea of like playing around with them for a long time, but last year we're really forced to go all in with all of this, and it was like a pretty steep learning curve. A lot of these technologies are very new, and there's still a lot that goes into making it work properly, but also like building something that is actually compelling for the viewers and is great entertainment content. So I think going to a post-COVID world with this additional baggage of expertise and experience with these new technologies just gives us the ability to create much better shows that we were able to in a pre-COVID world. So I think it's just gonna make things even more exciting.
Yeah, I think it's incredibly exciting because we're really in the early stages of esports production, right? And almost the visual literacy that is esports, and the first down marker, or the just the scoreboards that we have. So many esports, we're still building those, and so many different games and the competition around them are stats heavy and in many cases very complex topics. So the way that we can actually display these things, for the most part, have been relegated to on-screen. So when we can start doing that in another dimension, with AR and dynamic graphics, or layer things on to sequentially tell a story and build kind of the literacy in how esports is, I think there's really sky's the limit in terms of how AR will continue to get integrated into that layer of it. And then from a competition experience, I mean, there's really a new game, that really makes big waves, every 2 years minimum, right? So when we start thinking about what is a VR competition experience, and what is that, hybrid world, Swan, we're talking about a little bit, whether it's working out or it's actually a digital or physical hybrid playing field, and that's yet another layer, is a whole new world. And I think COVID and a lot of the stuff where people were forced into their labs and stuck at home to have to innovate with great constraints, I think is only going to blossom in the years to come.
I think it's getting people adapted to the technology, like getting more familiar with Twitch, getting more familiar with different esports, and also it's allowing for more interactivity. Like there's all these fans that try to go streaking or interact with the basketball players, the football players, but on Twitch, you can actually send over little bombs. Like on Beat Saber, you can send over bombs to interact with like the streamer. So there's like giant like fireworks, names are being like announced for like donating Twitch bits. So it's allowing for a connectivity to the point that it's almost like a Tron meets Hunger Games arena, where you can actually interact with the people that you really care about, and then send over donations for like, maybe a supply kit or a medical kit to show up in like a new, like kind of like multiplayer, like battle royale arena. So it's actively making esports more active and engaging, instead of just passively watching and seeing the numbers and the scores and the stats. Instead, it's actually allowing like fans to participate, and that's like a new paradigm of interactivity.
Yeah, it's amazing to see the tech there to do that now as well. I remember about 6-7 years back now, we were doing a Battlefield show around the launch of around the launch of Battlefield 4, and it was 32 players from the US versus 32 players from the EU, sort of going head to head, and it got very competitive. But one of the things that was great about that was we were trying to rudimentarily let the teams let the audience give their team an advantage, with engagement, and we had to do it in such a ham-fisted way. But the idea now that you can actually drop items in game, and the tech's there to do it, and I think that's one of the things that's come out of this year, isn't it? We've people have, it was your point earlier on, Swan, that people have jumped into online gaming and multiplayer games to feel some sense of community. I mean, I've jumped on Apex Legends a ton of times to play with my friends in London, and we'll sort of like talk while we're playing, and it's kind of kind of nice to bond over running around and shooting other people, but you get the point. So yeah, no, I think it's incredible that you know, what's been a terrible thing for the world is in the tech sort of field and in this field has sort of, you know, prompted people to do some really cool things in this space. I think where I'd like to go now very quickly is just to say, and also just to add that Swan's now making us even more jealous of where she is with a change of location. So thanks for that.
My Wi-Fi was really bad, sorry.
No,
I'm getting
really
closer
kidding.
to the modem.
No, it's all good. So I think, I'm going to kind of divide you up here ever so slightly, and it would be good to hear from the people who are in the field of sports and esports in one camp, and the people who aren't in that field are more in the VR, XR, AR field in the other camp. So I mean, I'll let you divide yourselves. But first, the people who are on the panel here who are more from the XR, AR, VR background and less directly involved in sports and esports. What can esports and sports learn, and what are they missing? What are they not doing at the moment that they should be? Where should they be going?
I feel like there's no limitations in the virtual world. Like, one of the things that's really interesting is like the combination of crypto, blockchain, NFTs in the virtual world. So basically you can have NFTs of like special like gear and stuff like that for your virtual avatars, and you're not limited to the physics of this world. So you can create games where you're flying through space, you can create games on other planets, you can create games where there's like weird things that come out and attack you, and that's not something that can happen in the sports world. And the current esports world is still modeled after this reality where you have gravity, where you like basically have all these limitations. But in the VR space and possibly in the AR space, you don't have those limitations. And I feel like we haven't really creatively tapped into that, like creating something that's really, really different, really out there and really engaging.
We've got some people who are very heavily involved in esports and sports here. You know, where does the use of this tech go next? What's next for the integration of XR technologies into this space?
I can jump in with just like, so I've been using my Oculus Quest and been playing a bunch of Echo Arena, and I just love that model of like, you know, real multiplayer sports happening inside the VR world. And I think I would love to show more audiences what that looks like and what that can be, right? Because it's just, I feel like it's just tip of the iceberg here of, hey, forget the rules of a traditional playing field. Let's put it in a virtual space. These are real competitors competing at a high level. And how do we share that with a wider audience who isn't even in a VR headset, right? Somebody who's traditionally consuming it through streaming devices or your linear television, something like that. But I feel like something like a Echo Arena is a good model for us to, and I'd love to hear more other type of competitions like this that we can start to kind of learn and unpack and start to maybe put larger lights onto and share that with our audiences, because it's a very interesting model and may darn well be the future of a lot of sports. Flash forward a couple of years here.
Yeah, speaking of broadcasting, mixed reality has been key in terms of just showcasing the real player. So you can still have that relationship with the player, and integration of more mixed reality tech with what's going on in the avatar space would give better context for the viewers. Because right now with VR esports, it's just a lot of people with the headset on, and then you can see on the screen what they're seeing, but without the mixed reality, it's hard to envision the people in the world. And that's what's currently missing right now. It's like, how do we showcase more players that's multiplayer in the world, given that like Population 1 is one of the most popular multiplayer games on the Quest, and it's essentially Fortnite in VR. So how do we showcase that in the future?
Well, I'm sure Stephen and Michele would speak to this. Sorry, but whenever you're working with esports, just standard esports in broadcast, I mean, for years, getting a spectator mode to be able to actually show it in any decent sort of fashion was impossible. I mean, just people would never actually put the work in and do the you know, and for many reasons, you know, dev teams have lots of pressures. It's not an easy thing to do. So, you know, getting a spectator mode was a luxury. And you know, so when it comes to VR games, there was a game actually. So you know, we did a VR race, a race in VR as part of McLaren's Shadow Racer when we did their esports final. But it was just taking the feeds, as you're saying, as taking the feeds and cutting between the feeds from the cameras. There was one game though that actually did it the way I'd like to see it done, and that was I think it was called Project Spark. It was that may be what they ended up calling it. It was CCP, the guys who make EVE Online. They did this game, and it was like Tron. You like threw stuff at each other, and as an individual experience, very very engaging. I got quite carried away on it in Gamescom. One year, and just wanted to carry on playing it the whole time I was there. But it's what they did with that was they had this weird spectator mode where you could watch the game as if you were, and I'm going to explain this really badly now, it's a terrible thing to get into on a Zoom call, but as if you were sort of like a giant person and the game map was just this small, you know, it's like the size of my phone, so I could watch the people playing and sort of zoom into it. It was really clever. They'd really thought that through. I mean, I'm guessing if VR is going to have any sort of, you know, if VR esports are going to be something that people can watch as a shared experience, it's going to be in what they build into the game, right? As in the back end.
Yeah, I think the lines are blurring, and you know, we have all these different components like the video games. Obviously, like we're getting more and more access now to, you know, the core the game engines and the games, real-time data, but also like with the ability to render different perspectives, both for, you know, traditional viewing and you know, VR viewing as well. We're, you know, having a possibility to add elements in game as well, which is something that we didn't have in the past. It's fairly recent, and on top of that, like, you know, we have all this additional dimensions in terms of like, you know, virtual studios that we can use in terms of AR, in terms of XR, and all this, you know, different words. And then like, obviously, you know, the consumer side, which is now, you know, predominantly still, you know, consuming the content as traditional video, but it's increasingly becoming, you know, different forms, you know, where we've been experimenting with the different ways to, you know, you can consume the content is more interactive. Like, you know, with Twitch, we tried and we implemented for certain tournament experiences where you can select the point of view that you want to watch for, you know, each individual player, and switch like in a seamless way between different points of views, but also have completely interactive information and data where, you know, just like you don't have just data and information that is the same for everyone, but it's really like an interactive overlay that people can click on. They can select exactly what they want to see and how they want it displayed, and customize the experience. So this is just like, you know, one example, but really the beautiful thing is like, you know, all these lines are, you know, now converging into a virtual space where we can create really exciting experiences. And ultimately, it's all about like, you know, the content and the story and the experience, you know, that the fans are gonna be able to engage with. These are just, you know, tools that make our life, you know, easier and give us the ability to get there.
Yeah, Jason, you spoke so many thoughts there, but just to piggyback off of what Michele just said, the notion of kind of choose your own adventure, but like of an AR HUD of the augmented reality display, so that I as a viewer can take in a different data set, follow a different player, but render that in real time to have this really rich experience is a whole nother frontier that I don't know that from a premium viewing experience has really been made. I think we're scratching the surface at it, but I think that's a really interesting thing. And we could render, you know, the POVs as much kind of cloud computing as we have and the experiences. But the interesting thing here too is we talk about what is the viewer experience a lot at Twitch, and And then when I think back to my old days at NBC, it's like, well, is this a second screen experience on the phone, or is this a first screen? And now I just talk about, well, this is the experience, and having multiple POVs and being able to jump around, like that's not a second screen experience, that's the experience. And that's how you go into, an esports competition, or as we craft some of the dynamics of how to experience a 5v5 match, or, a MOBA, in a different version, and then layer on these new kind of gateways. So those are some of the exciting things that I think both in esports, but even professional sports world are interesting. And then the other thing from a really, kind of fandom perspective is, especially as the biggest stadium, probably the Big House in Michigan, right? It's 107,000 fans could fit in the stadium. That's it, right? And a lot of people watch on TV on their own. But when we talk about these media experiences, as we get more sophisticated, we could bring, exponentially more fans together and interactive and shared experiences that, no coliseum and no stadium that exists on the planet can even get close to. And those are things that we start talking about. And I had this conversation as I was trying to give a pep talk to a lot of my team members when we went into TwitchCon, where they're like, oh, well, it's different, we're not there. And I'm like, well, listen, at TwitchCon, you're really talking to 30, 40,000 people over the course of a weekend in San Diego. What if you could talk to millions at the same time? And it just brings this entire different presentation layer. And then as we get more sophisticated with how people can interact, it really even opens up the aperture even wider.
Steve, you really brought up a great point. It's the fact that there's no quota, there's no limit. You can actually expand beyond country lines. Now anybody can like listen in and like watch certain esports, like basically countries that don't have exposure to that, they can just go on and get exposure to like basically the people that's playing the space. Another point to bring up is the power of the virtual space in terms of like viewership, because there was something innovative in this experience called 1111. It was essentially where like TV and RPG kind of merge as one, and they had 3 viewpoints, and you could actually go back in time and watch replays. So the 3 viewpoints were goddess mode, where you can like enlarge yourself and then see everything like really tiny, so you can get an overall view of everything. And then there was like the character mode, where you could follow a character. Say for example, you can follow one of your like favorite players, and then just follow them through what they're doing and seeing what their like shots are when they're ducking and getting to learn from them. And then another one's a free roam one, where you can actually go around and then see how everybody's playing, and you can freeze time. That's a superpower that hasn't been available before, where you're right next to your 2 players and seeing how they're interacting and freezing time to see like how their angle is, like what they're when they're crouching, when they're getting ready to shoot. That's a superpower that's never been available before. And that's something that should be like interesting in terms of like esports capabilities, and also allowing fans to really learn how their players are number one.
Jason, Alex, James is in the waiting room to get back in. I don't know if there's a way to.
I don't have that power. I think that's Alex is the host, isn't he? So I'm powerless to help him back in, I'm afraid. This title of moderator means nothing.
See, that's another thing that can't happen. It's like panelists disappearing in the middle with real live panels.
I mean, I have to say, just so Alex, if you can hear this, yeah, if you could let him back in, that would be great. But yeah, look, going back to Stephen's point very quickly, and yours, is that this comes back to a chicken and egg thing that we've always thought about for years. And it's sort of sometimes when you're putting on a big event, an esports final, or even something like a big E3 press conference, one of those big moments that revolve around, especially with games and with esports, it's that old trade-off, isn't it, of the people in the room, and it's the same for regular sports as well. It's the trade-off of catering to the people in the room and catering to the people at home, and you can't do one and not the other. And the very often people will focus on the 1,000 people in the room, or if it's sports, obviously it's a much bigger crowd, tens of thousands of people in the room, and then but then there's millions watching at home. But you can't think about them separately, because if the people in the room don't look like they're having a good time. The people at home don't get that sort of atmosphere come over, and they don't have it. You know, it's all part of one equation. I love the idea of it just blurring in and everyone just being part of this sort of virtual stadium. That's mind blowing to actually think about a situation, you know, where that could happen. Not sure the bandwidth there yet.
Yeah, but I think, you know, Jason, the big thing too is that a lot of live sporting events and in esports as well, there's a level of energy that both of those audiences, the in-person audience and the audience at home, thrive off of. It's like a Broadway play, right? And you thrive off of the energy of the audience. And I think for what we did for Rivals, for GlitchCon, and just injecting, you know, artificial, but nonetheless fan noise and piping that back to the streamers on their return feeds starts to bring that energy along. And that's something that's tough to recreate, but now we're starting to get the tools to do so. So I think that's something that, to your point, like, it's great. And we can build that into the new layers of tech.
Yeah, and it's, you know, the conventions are there for a reason. I mean, Cliff, I'm guessing with, you know, you quite early on, you guys must have realised when you didn't have you didn't have a live sporting audience, you know, you had to take steps straight away to make that happen. You know, for that very reason Stephen's mentioning.
Yeah, I think going back to that brilliant note before, is the COVID drove some innovation. Look what we did down in the bubble down in Orlando at Wide World there, and what we were able to create. Obviously the technology that, you know, the investment that we've been doing for years into that space, but then pulling it all together on a Disney property and being able to salvage what was there. I think it's a great example. I love what we did around the NFL draft early in April during the COVID era, and brought together just an incredible amount of content and streams and player access, and kind of, you know, maybe one of the big first remote productions on a big scale like that was very, very visible, that worked well. So it's going to open a lot of doors. We're incredibly excited about, you know, what esports has done in this space, how it's weathered some storms, and absolutely created more fans out of our fans, because it had a chance to shine when traditional sports wasn't around, and hopefully we can continue to give it that light.
Okay, I think I'm going to have to draw this to a close. I could carry on talking about this for hours, but that's no one wants that. So I'll just draw this to an end by saying I know how busy all of you are, so thank you for your time today. It's very appreciated. Super interesting conversation. Thanks to Chris and Greg and the team at DreamlandXR for hosting this. You know, normally after one of these panels, when we do them in Vegas, I'd be off to the casino to lose some money at blackjack and drink some tequila. So in the spirit of not being defeated by COVID, I've got some tequila and some playing cards, so I'm going to make that happen for myself here afterwards. But in all seriousness, it would be great seeing everyone at CES next year, which you know, this isn't forever. So, you know, VR is great, but some things are nice in person. So I hope to see you all, obviously before, but, you know, in person at CES and at DreamlandXR next year. So thank you very much for your time today, and thanks for joining.